Well, good afternoon and welcome to this GIRI webinar where we're looking at how a strong relationship between the insurance and construction sectors can be material in our drive to reduce error. I'd like to let you know that this session is being recorded. I'm going to give a short introduction about GIRI for those of you who are not familiar with us, and then hand over to Paul and Amy, who are providing the substance of the webinar, looking at the relationship between insurers and the insured in the construction industry. Excuse me. On the housekeeping front, can I ask you to mute your microphones if you're not speaking, but remember to turn back on if you're invited to ask a question or to respond. And if you don't mind, please leave your video on because we feel that gives the meeting more vitality. Please use the chat box or the Q&A box for questions and comments as we go through, and we'll address these in a kind of wrap-up session following the presentation. If we run out of time to answer your queries live, we'll pick them up and respond after the meeting. If you have any tech problems, the usual advice, turn off and try again, i.e. leave the meeting and rejoin using the same link. Back in 2015, an ICE best practice group asked themselves the question, how much is error costing the industry? And the conclusion was, we don't know. GIRI was founded and obtained funding from industry to carry out a research project to establish the cost to the industry of error and its root causes. This research culminated in the issue of our strategy for change. And these are some of the key findings. We employed ground theory analysis and the Delphi method in our research, and this is a summary of the results. We found the overall wasted spend on error amounts to 21% of turnover. There's the direct cost of error, which is more easily measurable from NCRs and the like, and comes out at 5%. The indirect cost of error is the impact on other parties, particularly in terms of delay and disruption, and this amounted to 7% of turnover. Unrecorded process waste at 6% is where errors occur and are corrected, but without being recorded, and then there's latent defects, which are those identified after handover, and they cost 3%. Now, this has a range depending on project size and complexity of, shall we say, 10 to 25%, but it's still an order of magnitude higher than the average construction company profit margin. And it's worth noting that studies in the USA and Australia came up with similar results. So it's a no-brainer. We want to do something about it. GIRI was established following the original research as a not-for-profit membership-based organisation with the strategic aim of improving industry productivity through the elimination of error, and we became a limited company in 2017. The research demonstrated the link between error and productivity, and this helped to convince businesses in the industry as to the benefits of investing in a zero-error programme. But the world's changing, and boardrooms are now recognising the broader range of imperatives they need to satisfy, including safety, sustainability, and quality. An error-free strategy provides a platform for achieving all these objectives, and our strategic aim reflects this. GIRI has a wide variety of members, small and large, across the industry, clients, contractors, consultants, and supply chain. And this helps to give us the widest possible background upon which to base our research and recommendations and proposals. So let's take a quick look at how GIRI is going about seeking to achieve its objective of error reduction. We have a thought leadership role through our training, our framework, and through forums and webinars such as this. And then there's our knowledge sharing. We do a fair amount of research, and this is available on our website. We're very active in social media and communications, and we also provide networking opportunities for our members 4 times a year at the ICE. So the benefits of a GIRI approach to error: productivity. Well, this is avoiding the waste and time and materials to improve productivity. On the safety front, 37% of accidents can occur during rework. This is research found in Australia, but it's pretty similar over here. On sustainability, if we're not wasting that material and time and effort, then we're going to have a better carbon footprint. And I think the quality benefits are manifest. And if you're saving that time and money, you're going to be more predictable and have a better reputation. So we have 4 CITB accredited training courses. We have a framework which we developed for the systematic approach to avoiding error. We have a GIRI maturity matrix to help organizations measure their readiness to avoid error. We have a design guide which was produced following discussions between clients, contractors, consultants, and the supply chain, which looks at the early stages of projects and getting things right. We have a number of working groups: technology working group, metrics working, and the BSA, and of course the insurance working group, which we're going to discuss today. There's plenty of collaboration across the industry to make sure that we are working with others who have the objective of industry improvement in mind. So to our insurance working group, we developed our insurance guide last year and are continually seeking to create a safe environment for early feedback from insurers on risk and potential errors. We are also setting out to collaborate on the development of a GIRI kite mark, which will be endorsed by insurers, such that there may be beneficial impacts on premiums. Now let's hear from Paul.
Thank you, Cliff. Thank you for the introduction to me and to Amy. We've got a slide set that we will now bring up. Amy, if you could put it on the screen, that'd be great, and we can make a start. Okay. Thank you again, Cliff, for having us, and for the audience this afternoon. It's great to be able to speak to you all. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Amy, who's an associate in our London team. Thank you again for the invitation. What I'd like to do by way of introduction is to, for those who aren't aware, revise your memory of the insurance guide that was produced, as Cliff has mentioned, in September 2023. And I'm first going to do that by way of referring to risk management and its role within insurance. I'll then pass over to Amy, who will talk about some of the legislative background to insurance and the construction industry, why it's relevant for the Get It Right initiative. And then we will take through the various steps within a construction project which correspond to sections within the insurance guide and talk to those. We'll also at the end mention, and an important factor, the insurance kite mark scheme that GIRI is seeking to establish. That kite mark scheme I'll mention in more detail towards the end of today's webinar. Please do put your questions and answers into the Q&A box as we go along. Turning first to insurance and risk management, and Amy, if you could move to the next slide, that would be appreciated. Thank you. The insurance guide had a number of ambitions. The first one was to enable the construction industry to think about how insurance can improve industry, the benefits it can bring, and for insurers to have and for the construction industry to have a greater knowledge and understanding of how insurance can improve the sector, remove error, and increase productivity. Of course, these are goals that align closely with GIRI's objectives that you've heard Cliff speak about. what the end or the ambition, the final ambition of the insurance guide had been was to create that collaboration between insurers and industry, which has been missed in the past, and the consequence, release some of the cash and some of the energy which is currently locked up by way of dealing with error and omission in construction projects. So we'd love to hear your views on this as well. As I mentioned, as ever, please do put your questions into the box, and Amy and I, and perhaps Cliff as well, will be able to address those towards the end of the webinar. So those are the objectives then in the insurance guide: to seek to improve risk management, to have the balance of risk management in the construction and insurance industries, and to shed some light upon how the insurance market can assist the construction world in improving, reducing error, and sharing knowledge. And those are the key elements that we were seeking to address in the guide. You'll see on this slide a couple of those points. And the first one, as I mentioned already, collaboration was vital. But early engagement as well is vital. Engagement between the construction industry and insurers as the market develops and as you go through a construction project. And we'll talk about those in detail as we now go through the various slides. The key one, as you say, knowledge is key. I've mentioned that already. But understanding the risks that the construction industry adopts, where it enters into construction projects, and knowing how to balance those risks and how the insurance market can assist through sharing knowledge, improving knowledge, and improving collaboration. So those are the key factors that we were seeking to deal with in the insurance guide. And as I mentioned, we'll go through the various sections of a standard construction project now and cast some light upon how that process can help. What I would like, the key for us here today would be for you to be able to walk away from this webinar having a strong knowledge about the insurance market, how risk can be balanced by using the insurance market, and once that's been brought on board, think about how we can start to work in a closed fashion so that this kind mark I mentioned at the beginning can become a reality, an endorsement from the construction industry. That's what we're going to cover. I'll be speaking in a little bit more detail, as I mentioned, about the stages of the insurance guide and the construction project on a standard basis. But what I'm going to do now is pass over to Amy, and she's going to tell a little bit more and set the scene around the legal framework. Amy, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm an associate at Kennedys. So I want to start by looking at the current legal framework and how it's developed. Then, in essence, a series of high-profile failures have led to changes to improve the quality of outcomes in the construction industry. So the first significant piece of legislation is the Insurance Act 2015. As you will be aware, where there is a major disaster like the Grenfell tragedy or a smaller insurance claim, incomplete disclosures about construction materials or practices often lead to disputes over the coverage of insurance claims when risks are not fully communicated to the insurer in the first place, or where there's a breakdown in communication. So previously, insured parties were required to disclose every circumstance that they knew or ought to have known, which would influence an insurer in deciding whether to underwrite a risk. If they failed to do so, they risked the claim being denied under the policy, and this required the insured parties to predict, without very much guidance, what factors a hypothetical prudent insurer would be influenced by, which made it much easier for insurers to decline coverage claims. So the Insurance Act places the duty of fair presentation on insured parties, which requires them to disclose all material risks to insurers, but it also places the duty on insurers to make further inquiries about potentially material circumstances, rather than leaving it to insured parties to second guess. So this act therefore makes it harder for insurers to exclude risk, but importantly, it encourages active rather than passive engagement from insurers in the disclosure process. So then we have the all-important Building Safety Act, which was introduced in response to the Grenfell tragedy. And this act I won't go into too much detail here, but requires much stricter compliance with building safety requirements to improve standards long term. So it incentivizes better risk management across the board with new mechanisms like the golden thread of information, which requires there to be a digital record about a project which is easily accessible to everyone involved to ensure that the safety risks are properly managed. So while claims might have increased in the short term based on its stringent requirements for building safety compliance, its aim is to encourage a proactive safety culture and to prevent future failures. And I've also included the Limitation Act 1980. So whilst this is a slightly older act, this act provides the timescales within which claims can be brought by claimants before they're statute barred. So it was recently amended by the Building Safety Act to extend the limitation period for claims brought under the Defective Premises Act 1972. So this limitation period was extended by to up to 30 years, which provides much longer windows for victims to pursue legal claims. So what does all this mean for the market? Insurers are understandably cautious because these changes are likely to result in an increased number of claims in the near future. And this caution has undoubtedly led to increased premiums and stricter terms of insurance for the construction industry. However, these changes ultimately place a much greater emphasis on disclosure, accountability, and long-term risk management to improve the quality of buildings in the medium to long term. So improved quality should inevitably lead to lower numbers of claims and reduced premiums. Therefore, the GIRI guide clearly explains how construction players can collaborate with insurers to engage in a culture of proactive risk management rather than relying on reactive fixes. So importantly, this means that whilst the possibility of a claim can never be completely eliminated, should it arise, a collaborative approach can leave the insured parties in a much stronger position. So I'm going to pass back over to Paul to start with taking you through the insurance guide.
Thanks, Amy. If you move on to the first slide, that would be helpful. Thank you. Yeah, what I'd like to now do is take you through some practical steps which have been outlined in the guide, practical steps that the construction industry can engage with when it seeks to deal with insurers, with a view to increasing knowledge of how the insurance industry can assist the construction world in dealing with risk and balancing risk. As I mentioned at the outset, the insurance guide took, in a broad way, a standard building project and dealt with the various sections of that building project. And I'm going to do a little bit of that now. Starting off then with the conceptual design and procurement. This is a preliminary to any building process. And at this stage, insurers can be brought on board and engaged with. Doing so at tender stage is a key facet to that. Clients can make insurers aware of the project, conception of that project. Insurers can take that on board and set out what they think will be necessary from an insurer's perspective to discharge whatever role is being undertaken by that particular entity. Once those elements have been identified, they can be then put and dealt with and factored into the next stage of the process and built into any tender requirements as well. That way, we're avoiding a failure to understand a discrepancy between information that's required and the objectives that the insurer might seek to obtain and the objectives that the construction industry body might be seeking to achieve as well. Investing early to avoid costs later down the line is something that you will see repeated in the guide and repeated in GIRI's own literature. Early investment demonstrate that organizations are willing to take an upfront view as to the importance of getting the project right from the beginning, and the rewards of that are oftentimes a reduction in errors and a reduction in the frequency of errors, leading to a smoother construction program rather than spending money at the tail end of a project, which inevitably leads to dealing with claims, or there can be an expensive and a part of the construction project that many people will want to avoid. Investing early, therefore, is a key element to this. Early contractor engagement as well is important to reduce error. Quality, as we've heard mentioned, is key. The legislative framework can set the tone for how projects are dealt with, but there has to be a part about behaviour. Behaviour within the construction team is important and critical. So early contractor engagement is key, rather than having a race to the bottom, as we've had criticised many times in recent years. There needs to be an upfront understanding of the value of early engagement. Bringing contractors at the conceptual stage again is important. Make sure that all parties are working together in order to reduce risk and the likelihood of error occurring at a point in the future. I think it's also important to consider procurement routes, and the guide talks about this in detail, and how contracts are established and set up. And that means considering the right contracts for the particular supply chain that has been taken on, what impact those contracts will have on the supply chain, and how those contracts can be insured against, and the view your insurers may take upon the contractual process, the contractual nexus that is being established at the outset of the project. It's an important factor, I think, for the construction world to understand. The more time which is spent then on dealing with these issues at the outset of a project, during this early conceptual design and procurement phase, the better outcomes will be seen towards the end of the project. The fewer the errors will be incurred, and the less money and the less time will have to be spent and exhausted in dealing with parts of construction projects where errors have occurred, redesign is required, and all the things that you'll be familiar with within the industry and we're familiar with as lawyers and we see on a day-to-day basis. So those are important, I think, as a final comment from me on this part of the phase. Dealing with those points now rather than leaving them to the next stage of a construction project is key. So please have that as the forefront of your mind. Moving on to the next part of the insurance guide's objectives, and we sought to deal with as early stage and detailed design. Now, this is the point of a project where the design is dealt with, is developed to the point where construction can be about to begin. It's a crucial period where the brief moves from a conceptual to a construction level. We set out some steps here. You see mentioned steps to success. They've been described as. These at this point, it might be worth mentioning, to be worthwhile having a look at the GIRI design guide, which is also available on the GIRI website. Many of you will be familiar with how that is established, but it's a good practice guide recommending how design can be dealt with. And we'll think a little bit now about how that design process can be dovetailed with the role of insurers here. So clarifying roles and responsibilities at an early stage. The insurance guide and those involved in the felt it was important that the project team have a clear understanding of who's responsible for each relevant part of the construction project, avoiding divergences from various parties' objectives and contractual requirements. So clarity in the employer's requirements, clarity in the contractor's proposals. As all parts of this process, it's important to engage with the insurers who will have seen similar projects a number of times and will be familiar with the types of projects that have been undertaken and may be able to share knowledge and best practice from examples that they have seen across the markets. Handing over design responsibility to the design and build contractor, crucial part in any construction project, the point at which the contractor becomes responsible. There is perhaps a wider discussion to be had about design and build and its appropriateness to certain types of projects. but is as things stand, a very popular procurement method, employing a contractor at this point to advise on buildability, dealing with the design stages, and considering how those design stages can be developed is important. Contractor input may, at this stage, if it's not engaged with properly, may result in absences, gaps in results when design packages aren't dealt with properly, they aren't procured, and there's a lack of clarity around the design packages and the design responsibilities that the contractor is taking on. Clarifying those at an early stage is important, and the insurance world is familiar with them and can easily provide advice and guidance as to how they can be dealt with. Perhaps most important is culture and resource. Now, what do we mean by that? GIRI, as many of you will be familiar with, has culture as a critical element of how any construction project ought to be procured. Having the right culture, by which we mean understanding how problems can be solved in a collaborative manner, and establishing that culture at the early stages of a project between design teams, so there isn't a failure of coordination at a later point, is important. So having that established at an early stage, avoiding counterproductive arguments and the failure of culture at a later point is important. And again, insurers will be and are familiar with how that culture and resource can be established and how it can be developed. So having this again as a key element at this point in the construction process is it's important. There's a number of general observations as well at this stage that you might wish to consider. Having a robust design process built into the contract, proper training on things such as BIM. We mentioned earlier, culture, and no blame culture is important. I refer you again to research which GIRI has conducted, and openness and no blame is a huge benefit to those involved in the construction process and the design team as well. Understanding that sufficient resources are required in the long term, particularly if you're looking to change culture within organizations, and being prepared to take a moment to stop, and if necessary, control the procedure and change it if that's what's required. All of these are key facets of what is, in essence, a very important and critical stage of any construction project. Engaging insurers throughout this is important. So once you've dealt with early design and detailed design stage, we move on to construction. What happens during the construction phase, and this engages a number of stakeholders in the manufacturing and commissioning of systems to the actual buildability on site. Logistics, as many will be familiar with, are essential to this. But I think dealing with communication perhaps is an essential facet. Having an open and collaborative relationship, having early and regular engagement with insurers and the design team reduces errors and the claims that arise as a consequence and as a result of errors. Clear construction management plan, which has been approved and reviewed by insurance, and ensuring that all the relevant insurances are in place, contributes to smooth communication and important if the project is going to be successful. Scheduled inspections, engaging insurers in scheduled inspections is an important part of any policyholder's obligations, and they represent, from a contractor's point of view, a management process where the client team can review progress, filter that back, and fulfill any professional requirements that are necessary during that inspection phase. Insurers can provide their own insights, and engagement at this stage is important. You've heard mentioned the legislative framework, including the Building Safety Act, and the golden thread that Amy mentioned, and ensuring that there is an exchange and the keeping of records not only has become a legal requirement, but it is also something that improves quality and collaboration and communication and avoids failures in those areas. So having a single source of information during the course of a project important, which you had mentioned for high risk buildings, that say there's a legal requirement there. Having that now is likely to lead to successful projects outside of the purely legal requirements. And when changes are required, so when design changes occur, having an effective management process and having records kept in an efficient manner helps managing those design changes, which can be inevitable during the course of a project, and also leads to clear delineation of roles and responsibilities within construction projects as well. So learning about these and organisations taking ownership for those during the course of a project is also critical outside of the purely legal framework. Brokers and risk assessors perhaps can also have a role in this. Brokers, because of the close relationship with construction bodies and insured organisations and stakeholders, and risk assessors, who might also be able to provide views as to relevant risks that occur on site, how they might be ameliorated or diminished. Those elements, I think, are, again, something that during the construction phase of a project where things can go wrong, need to be looked at and addressed. So summarising where we are on this particular phase of a construction project and how insurers can be engaged, think about collaboration, think about record keeping, think about early engagement. Amy, I think you're now on.
Great, thanks all. So next we have the handover phase, which is where the building project transitions from construction to operation. And importantly, this is when many defects are brought to the contractors and insurers' attention. And significantly, as we discussed earlier with the Building Safety Act, limitation periods have been extended so that claims now can be brought for up to 15 years after practical completion. So therefore, this stage is critical for setting the foundation for safety, compliance, and long-term risk management. So some important risk management considerations here include the ongoing maintenance of high-quality documentation post the construction phase. So proper documentation is not only essential to ensure the building is operationally safe and compliant, but if and when a claim does arise post-handover, key documents including building safety manuals, fire safety protocols, and any certifications for regulatory compliance must be up to date and easily accessible to have the best chance of resolving the claim. So then another consideration is digital data sharing technologies, which, as we mentioned again, are very important from a legal compliance perspective now that the Building Safety Act requires a golden thread of information. So we also want to consider management of the defect liability period as the initial 6 to 12 months post-completion. So here there should be a clear process for addressing handover defects during this period. So it's important that to ensure a quick resolution of defects and to minimise any disruptions. So this comes down to making sure that the contractual provisions are clear in the first place, and post-handover, during this period, proactive communication continues between the contractor and the client, which may be by, for example, scheduling inspections during this period. So looking beyond the defect liability period, onto the occupation and maintenance stages. So it's very important that maintenance is properly managed to ensure that the likelihood of claims are reduced, and when a claim is made, there's a clear distinction between maintenance failures and failures in the design and construction of a project. So when it comes to maintenance, this can be done by developing and adhering to a scheduled maintenance plan for all the critical systems, including any structural elements, HVAC, and fire safety equipment. And this ideally would include conducting regular inspections of high-risk features like cladding, green roofs, or timber frames, as I will address a bit later down the line. So that's that stage. And then, so after we've covered occupation maintenance, this is the end of life phase. So this stage has two aspects. So one is the very unique challenges posed by modernising older structures to meet today's standards. And the second aspect is the reality that many buildings that are built today will be refurbished and repurposed in the future. So addressing the challenges that are faced by older structures, many older buildings were constructed under outdated regulations, which make them very difficult to align with modern standards, or can be very difficult to align with modern standards. So non-compliance with current codes can increase the insurance premiums and limit buildings' usability. A fairly topical example is the Parliament Restoration and Renewal project, which faced unexpected challenges in terms of asbestos removal, outdated infrastructure, which obviously all cause escalating costs and delays. And I just think this example highlights the importance of thorough planning and risk assessments, and involving specialist expertise at an early stage when upgrading any historic building to ensure that the budget is provided to meet today's legal and safety standards. So then the second aspect, in terms of future refurbs of today's building. So this is also relates to my previous slide in terms of creating a maintenance schedule from day one, which ensures that all systems are regularly inspected and upgraded to maintain functionality and compliance over time. So likewise, it's so important to maintain a comprehensive record of design, materials and changes to ensure that any refurbishment teams in the future don't have any unexpected challenges. So lastly, this is slight segue from the lifespan of a building, but I just want to address the sustainability and ESG initiatives, which are reshaping construction, because they are on the agenda of many clients. But there is also a push for decarbonisation from the government, which includes the UK net zero carbon building standards launched in September 2024. So it is a generally accepted fact that the construction industry in the UK is responsible for 40% of the country's carbon emissions, which has put a pressure on the construction industry to find new technologies and innovative ways to reduce its carbon footprint. So the key point here is that while sustainability is critical, it introduces untested risks that must be carefully managed. New technologies often lack the decades-long testing of traditional methods, making long-term performance uncertain, and insurers understandably wary of future claims which could arise as a result. So just to take you through a couple of examples, we have timber frame is being increasingly used as a sort of sustainable alternative to concrete and steel, which is obviously great for its sustainability and carbon capture properties. However, it's quite clear that timber is more combustible than traditional materials, which raises fire safety concerns, but it's also more susceptible to rot and mould if it's not adequately protected and treated. Similarly, modern methods of construction, such as prefabrications, whilst they do offer environmentally friendly properties and cost benefits, the issue is that they are constructed off-site, which can lead to assembly flaws and potential structural failures. And obviously the inspections the construction of these materials off-site means that they aren't subject to the same level of inspections. And the government's push for modern methods of construction in affordable housing projects has raised questions about quality control and regulatory compliance. So ultimately, when it comes to sustainability and ESG objectives. It's all about balancing the risk, as I said. So insurers can offer risk consultations during design and planning phases, and help construction firms identify the risks associated with sustainable materials such as timber frame, and processes such as prefabrication, and advise on fire retardant treatments of timber, and advise on the appropriate factory inspections and third-party certifications required for prefabricated components. So in sum, by actively engaging with the construction industry, insurers can facilitate the adoption of sustainability practices, whilst managing and advising on the associated risks. So, handing back to you for some case studies.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'm going to mention, that was great. I'm conscious of time, but I will mention to turn to a couple of case studies, and I will have a look at these and try and get through these quickly. So, first one I comes to my mind is a project that I was involved in terms of a claim a number of years ago. Without mentioning any specifics, a residential refurbishment where there had been problems with collaboration coordination between parts of a design team and a contractor team. It was a practical example, what we heard earlier, of how there's an instance of a lack of a culture which wasn't got right in the beginning. And looking at that in hindsight, I wonder whether having a closer union between those parties, a closer understanding of what their objectives were and coordinating those would have led to a better outcome. As it happened, there's several £1 million spent in reworking legal costs. As you get on these types of projects, many of you will be familiar with that. But that was an example that came to my mind, and it's one which has been, many people will expect, has been replicated across projects of various natures, not only residential, but also moving into engineering and infrastructure projects as well. Now, for me, the lesson out of that particular example was how to engage with the client team and how to engage with the design team. And in the absence of insurers adding their own views, their own particular objectives, their own particular benefits that they have from the case that they see, there was something missing. And that was an example which came to my mind. And I think an early engagement with the insurance market in that particular project would have led to a sounder and better outcome and avoided engaging the lawyers, which happened in the end. Another example, which I'll mention again, is a residential project on a larger scale than one I mentioned now, but on a scale that has now led to significant rework of elements of this development, issues which have been familiar across the market, including issues with green roofs and other parts of the building where there have been defects identified. For me, early engagement in that process by insurers perhaps would have been a benefit, might have led to alternative approaches, alternative options, and different options being taken, and perhaps observations taken during the course of the project would have led to a better outcome. Again, collaboration appears to be an element that has led to failed, and insurers engaging with that collaboration process, assisting in the collaboration process, I think in this instance, would have led to several millions of pounds of claims having been avoided and rework having been avoided, and the disruption as well to residents being avoided as a classic example of something that in this instance didn't quite go according to plan. There are many examples many of us could provide, and GIRI's own research has identified in generic terms examples of this as well. So those were, for me, a couple of short mentions of examples where risk management didn't happen and quality and claims arose as a consequence. And I just want to turn now, if I might, to a final part I would like to talk to, which is the GIRI kite mark scheme, something which is in, at the moment, embryonic stages, but it's something which has been mooted by GIRI for a little while now. That is the ambition to establish a kite mark scheme, which is in effect an endorsement of GIRI and its objectives, seeking to certify that certain risk management steps have been taken and that process is recognised and supported by insurers, leading to end results that are helpful, potentially affecting premiums and the insurability of projects and insurability of individual organisations, establishing the objectives of that climate scheme, the setting the goals which might need to be established to ensure that an organisation can receive an endorsement are ongoing. And I invite those who are interested in that and looking for insurers to support that scheme to engage with us. The benefits are clear, it seems to me, and will lead to a stronger, better supported and more sustainable insurance and construction industry in the future. And I'd invite those who are interested in establishing this to engage with that scheme as soon as you can. Please get in touch. That's my final plea to you all. Please take a look at that and contact us if you can. I think that's all we've got to say this afternoon, but we are here to answer questions. So I think if we can bring up the Q&A, if that's available, Amy, if you can stop sharing the slides.
I'm not sure where that noise is coming from. It's not coming from that.
Would you like to pick up the
feedback here?
Okay, Cliff, would you like to pick up the questions that are in the chat and in the Q&A?
Hello? Yeah, somebody's got a lot of feedback coming through. Right. Well, thanks very much for that, Paul and Amy. A couple of questions came to my mind. One was when you were talking about got to the maintenance bit and getting a maintenance plan. Is it envisaged that that is going to be produced as part of the golden thread?
I can feel that one if you like, Cliff. I think the idea of having a golden thread of information at point of handover, we're talking about high-risk buildings here, remember, as well, when we're talking about the legal requirements for the golden thread, is to have a package of information handed over to the team who's then responsible for the operation of the building. So there's a maintenance of building information which can be drawn down upon by those who are operating and maintaining the building. I think that the golden thread is a major improvement. Personally, I think that's something that is best practice, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say that I would like to see that golden thread expanded upon, and other areas outside of the high-risk building regime looking to utilise that as well.
Okay, that's fine. The other thing is I just wanted to emphasise was that when you talked about the Insurance Act in 2015, and was I understanding that that was a kind of change in needing the insurers to be more proactive about the risks that they are insuring, rather than leaving it to the insured to come up with all the risks? Is that the fundamental of that, Amy?
I think it's more that there's an obligation, or there's an obligation on the insured to make insurers aware of all risks which they think would influence an insurer's decision. But there's also, off the back of that, requirements for the insurer to make more inquiries about anything which they are uncertain about or is not immediately clear, or which might influence their decision. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Has that been tested in terms of liabilities then for, well, if claims are made and then, well, you should have known about that or you shouldn't have known about that? How is that being tested in the courts then?
I'm happy to elaborate a little on this, Cliff. What the Insurance Act sought to do was to codify various parts of what had been old statutes and case law and take a different approach in certain instances. I think what you're referring to here is an exchange of information prior to a policy incepting, which is called the duty of fair presentation. What I, again, was the ambition of introducing that in on a statutory basis was to enable insurers to have a better understanding of the risk that was being undertaking. The onus in this instance is on the insured party to give the proper disclosure of all matters that might be material to an underwriter looking at that risk. The courts have looked at this, and there's plenty of authorities that deal with how the Act might operate in this situation. I think what the Act sought to do was achieve a balance of fairness between what might be expected of an insurer and what might be expected of an insured carrying out that risk. That, I think, is what the Act was attempting to achieve when it put into statute some of those codified what previously had been found in various places and under statutes in a better way. I have that as your ambition, I think, for the fairness of disclosure to insurers. It's better for the construction industry and better for the insurance world as well.
Yeah, it seems like it. We've got a question from Guy Bolt in the Q&A. Do you consider the provisions in the typical standard contracts used in the UK, JCT and NEC, are sufficient and aligned to the needs of the insurance industry? What are the key matters that clients should instruct their legal teams to address within schedules of amendments?
That's a lot.
You could be here all afternoon answering that. Have a go.
I think that's a separate seminar in itself, I think, Cliff, actually. I think we can be speaking about that. So maybe we'll turn it over, Guy, and we'll speak to you for, we can have a whole session on it. Well, I think the short answer to this is, I mean, when you're talking about specified amendments, then you do need to take legal advice, and it will be bespoke according to whatever the particular project is. There are various types of insurances that are engaged as well in the course of a construction project, professional indemnity, CAR, project insurance in certain instances too. So there's a lot to get on there. I think can I give you a summary answer?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm trying hard to scratch my head now to give it to the quick fashion. Well, I think that the best answer I can give you is, I think if you engage with insurers at the stage of a project where you're thinking about bringing on the design team, and prior to that, think about what needs to be told to insurers, what ought to be disclosed. Remember what I said earlier about collaboration and early engagement. Now, when you're at the stage of putting the contracts in place, you kind of taking a couple of steps before we get there. So seeking legal advice upon how the contracts deal with project insurance, for instance, or how they cover up risks for materials on site. That's important, and that's the finer detail, and that's what the lawyers are good at. And I don't want to diminish that. But I think you also need to think about is, even before you get to the contract stage, what is a culture you got in place? Is it one where you can share information? Is it something that, are you looking to bring on project insurance, which probably requires a greater degree of collaboration? And that sets the tone for how insurance will operate. That's a summary answer. But guys, we can hold a seminar for you, maybe even a mini conference on that one.
Great. Okay. I've got something from MH here. Dear Amy and colleague, please could you outline what your yardsticks for premium setting are? Is it just past records or also project-specific questions and answers in conjunction with the assessment of the project or site audits? I think that's a broker's question, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't think I'd set any premium.
Yeah, I think it's a broker's question, that one. I think about premium setting, but I'll be all not to put words in the mouths of brokers who can speak eloquently themselves. I mean, what I think is there are a number of factors which brokers will weigh up, and claims records, etc., all part of that mix. Perhaps we have brokers on the call now who might like to chime in.
Yeah, I don't know. All I've got is letters. Anyway, we're coming up towards the. I'm just trying to see whether I've missed any.
There's one more
Regarding
question
the
from
framework, we've had an
Cliff.
initial. Sorry, the kite mark
Hmm.
situation. We've had a meeting already, but and I'm committed to following up on that, and I will be following up on that shortly. But if you are interested in the GIRI framework, please do get in touch with me or Susan at Press Get It Right. Sorry, Susan, you were going to say?
There's one more question in the Q&A from Jim Neal that you might want to pick up.
All right. New posts. You raised the importance of collaboration, which sounds eminently sensible. Do you have a schedule of issues which you consider are important to understand at each stage of a project lifecycle, which could be used to prompt contractors and others to involve you at the appropriate stage? Does your collaborative involvement attract a fee, or would this be part of the insurance premium? So that's over to you, Paul.
Yeah, I think my starting point for that, answering that one, my best option I think here is to have a look at the insurance guide. There's a lot of information there, and I put it out there. Have a look at that. That gives you a number of views and information about how you can engage with insurers at the relevant stages of a project. Please have a look at that. How this impacts upon and affects premium, maybe again that's a question for the insurance market. But the kite mark which we're seeking to establish now is going to be I hasten to add or guarantee, but it's an endorsement. It's the clues in the name. It's a kite mark of quality here, and that we think once we have the relevant detail in place, will be seen as a quality mark, which the insurance industry recognises. And the quality of that then is there's a necessary premium impact. So we think that's where we'd like to get to, and I think that's what the kite mark is about. But it's not only that, and the kite mark is also about establishing a brand of quality within the industry and having that recognised within the industry. That again is an important part of what we seek to put in place with the kite mark. But that's I think where we are with that, and it's any engagement with this. Have a look at the design guide as well. You heard me mention that. That's helpful for giving indications about how design can be used. But in my view, the insurance guide perhaps is the best place to turn to in the first instance. But look, if you want to speak to either me or Cliff, anyone else, we're here to answer them.
And as far as paying is concerned, I think we would expect the insurers to provide some assistance in identifying those risks as part of the service they offer, rather than being an add-on. That's certainly the impression we got from the people that were involved in the development of the guide, where they were inviting people to ask them questions and the like.
Yeah.
So it's now 2 o'clock or just slightly gone. So if there are more questions in the chat and Q&A and we haven't answered them, we have got the record of them, and we will get back to the questioners. But I'd just like to say thank you very much to Paul and Amy for their input today and wise words. And I do recommend anybody who's on the call to go and have a look at the GIRI insurance guide. We put quite a fair bit of time and effort into it last year, and it really can help you when you're thinking about risk and insurance. So thank you very much for coming and joining us today, and hopefully you'll be able to join us again at our next webinar next month, which I think is Richard Davis on I can't remember.
Pre-mortems.
Oh, pre-mortem, that's right. Part of the assessments of projects before you get going on them. So thank you very much, everybody, and hope to see you soon.